Chase money, you make short term decisions. If you chase control, you destroy relationships. The only way to build something lasting is to focus on impact.
Lloyd, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for hosting me. I'm stoked. I'm pumped.
Awesome. Man, every entrepreneur has an interesting story of how they overcame obstacles to become an entrepreneur. And I'm sure you have some unique stories, even just from the way you got to America. And there's a lot that goes into your story. So can you share a little bit about your journey of entrepreneurship?
Definitely. So, my first experience with entrepreneurship was a very strange one. It was experiencing the Gulf War. So, let's preface like what entrepreneurship is, or what is the journey of an entrepreneur. It's taking an idea, taking an obscure idea to fruition, execution, and impact, right? While dealing with extreme uncertainty and risk. That was what the Gulf War was. So I think I was in grade 4 or something, and I think I had a learning disability of some sort because I would always procrastinate. I never wanted to read. I hated reading. I hated studying, and I would always study last minute. So I studied for a math exam. I show up, it's a geography exam, and I knew I was going to fail. One morning in the summer, my mom wakes me up and says, "Hey, there's no more school. The war has broken out." And my first reaction was, "Yes, you're never going to find out that I failed this exam." But as reality started to sink in and seeing the worry on their faces, I realized the reality of the situation and what could be. And there was a time where there were no phones, there was no internet. I went down the building with my dad and saw a bunch of concerned faces. And very quickly, it went from belaboring on the problem to thinking about solutions. And immediately people started saying, okay, you know what? I'll watch the building because the security had lapsed in the country. I'll guard the building from 8 to 12. You guard it from 12 to 4, like 2-3 people at the same time. I'll organize supplies. I'll organize logistics, like whatever it was, that coming together to support one another in that building. Every building became a sub community. And word of mouth spread from building to building to community leaders, to embassies, to governments, and a grassroots movement that evacuated the country, the population of the country to safety. Probably one of the largest grassroots movement that came together to evacuate people to safety at a time where cell phones or internet didn't exist. Imagine that, right? They convinced the Indian government to help. They convinced governments of countries to help, cut through all the bureaucracy. That's how loud the voice of the people got through coordination. Through coordination when there was no Excel probably, right? There was none of that. Word of mouth. And that's when I understood, I didn't know if that was entrepreneurship, but I definitely developed an affinity for risk and uncertainty and ambiguity. And taking something from nothing to something. That was also my first big experience with community. Prior to that, I had experienced the love of community as I would visit my grandparents in Mumbai. They lived in a slum, and my mom and her 9 siblings grew up in a slum in Mumbai. There was no common bathroom, right? Like you had to use a public toilet, and it was hard, man. That house probably was made out of, I don't know, some cement-like structure, cement blocks maybe, and there was a tin roof. Or was it aluminum? And there was barely room for a couple and 10 kids there, right? Like my grandparents, 10 kids. But Mumbai, is the New York of India. And every time I'd visit, there's somebody or the other passing by or staying with them. And I'd ask, like, why do you have these rando people here when you don't have room for yourself? And I would always get some version of this answer from either my grandma or grandfather or my parents that the only way to create abundance in life is to help other people without expecting anything in return. And if you do that, they may not help you, but the karma will always take care of you. And over time, I see now that all of their kids, of course, my grandparents' kids are not in that slum. They're all well off. And their kids are also well off, which truly, I guess, manifested, right? That the only way to create abundance in life is to help others without expecting anything in return. But some of my fondest memories as a kid was going and hanging out in that slum. It was during the summers when it was monsoons in India and it would rain a lot, and puddles would turn into ponds, and we were swimming in those ponds, right? Dirty. Watching TV, because not every home there had a TV, was a communal activity. You'd have cable television with pirated movies, and people would coop up and watch together, and the people who couldn't get in were hanging by the railings outside, watching from outside, and just playing and hanging out, and this very community-like vibe. there was this cow shed there where we would get milk from. I don't know what it's called. A barn, like a barn, right? Like a
A
cow
barn,
barn.
okay.
In Hindi, it's called tabela, right? And that's where we'd get our milk from. And I loved animals. So every time I'd go there, I'd, try to steal a calf from there. And then one day they let me take it, and I take it into my grandparents' home, and they had like a small little pole there, and I tied it there. But that was the love of the people. It's like, let it be, like, let them be, right? They're kids. And my fondest memories were visiting there. And then number of years later, I experienced the camaraderie and the fellowship around the Gulf War and how that grassroots movement came together. And we got on this bus that went from Kuwait to Baghdad to Jordan. And you talked about it. You had a lot of relatives during that time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was on this highway of death where buses were being bombed and you weren't sure if you were going to live or die. And everyone on that bus technically should have been concerned and depressed and sad because they had no currency. They weren't sure where they're going, when things are going to materialize. But what was really interesting was everyone on that bus was singing and laughing and playing the guitar. And I realized that it's neither the destination nor the journey, but the companions that matter the most. You could be on a crappy journey on the way to hell, but great companions will make it memorable. And ask yourself this: have you been in an expensive, exquisite environment, probably having expensive wine, but felt like suffocated and wanted to leave?
Because you're by yourself and you have no one to share that with. Yeah, exactly. And I think even some of the mental disorders that we have in this country or around the world today has a lot to do with the community factor of it too, because they're just not, right? Like this COVID created people just shutting themselves in their homes and not have access to friends and relationships and community that you're referring to. And then they felt depressed. And then they went to, rely on substance to replace the void that they, that was created because of the lack of community, for sure. So here we have, like, you get that little taste of entrepreneurship just watching how people create things out of nothing, right? You're creating, being resourceful with the little that they had. So that's kind of how you get exposed to this whole concept. Now you're, at the cusp of actually just launching this brand new book. It's coming out at the time this episode is published. It's probably already live, From Grassroots to Greatness. So that gives me some idea where you probably got the name for the book.
The name from the book actually came from my brother, because the working title was Community-Led Growth. My brother designed the cover of the book, right? And he inspired the title. He actually gave me my purpose in a way. We were sitting one day and he said, what is your purpose in life? I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, don't give me the purpose of your company boast. Like, what is your purpose? He's like, I'll tell you what your purpose is. Your purpose is bringing people together to make them happy, to spread joy. And he's like, think about it. Every time you go anywhere, organically people come together around you, wherever you are. He's like, as a family, we used to not socialize. And you're the guy who created the WhatsApp groups. You're the guy who every time you're in town, although we don't see each other, but when you're there, we hang out every single day. And so he gave me that purpose. And he said, your book can't be called Community-Led Growth. It has to have a deeper purpose. And he came up with the title. He designed the cover. And so I'm eternally grateful to always, through my journey, be surrounded by people like that who've been very helpful, right? And if you look, there was recently, I think, a lot of study done around blue zones. Have you heard about that? Blue zones?
No.
Blue zones are these regions of the world where people tend to live longer and experience higher levels of well-being. What they say is they live functionally to being 100. It's no good if you live to 100 and you're not functional, right? I'd rather not live dysfunctionally till being 100. And there are 9 common traits often associated with blue zones, and 5 out of them are community oriented: strong family bonds, sense of purpose, right? Social engagement, social physical activity, belonging to spiritual communities. So 5 out of their 9 traits are community oriented. It is also said that being a part of a community, having great companions, are a big part of your mental well-being. And it's so important, right? Like, if you're surrounded by toxic people, your energy is down. Great companions make it memorable no matter where you are. Like, being in a slum, I was happier than being in a 5-star hotel, right? And so it's very, very important as we come out of COVID, as we're in an environment where layoffs are happening through the roof, curating your companions wisely is the the key to having great well-being. And so as you know, after I left the day-to-day operations of Bo, so look at my journey, right? Being, you know, my first community was every summer being in that slum with where my grandparents lived. Then the Gulf War happened, moved to Canada, finished engineering, moved to the US, worked at a number of startups. After I finished engineering, I wanted to go into entrepreneurship, and the first job I took was in sales. I asked an entrepreneur what's the best skill. He said cold calling. He said sales basically. And I tried to get a job in sales, and I couldn't. Nobody would give an engineer a job as an account executive, no experience. So I begged my way into getting a job doing cold calls. My parents, who are from India, they lost it. They're like, our son who just finished engineering is making $30,000 cold calling when our friends' kids are at Microsoft in that. But fast forward today, everything I am is because of that skill, right? Because sales teaches you to communicate on the fly, polish your messaging, pivot. Everything you do as an entrepreneur is selling, from convincing your spouse that you want to do a startup, or after working at a number of failed ventures, convincing early employees, convincing customers, convincing your developers on the direction to take, evangelizing people on the vision, the mission, the purpose of the company, evangelizing the media. Communication is everything. Communication is the rails that takes you from audience to community to movement to religion, right? Like communication is the absolute rails. And I needed to learn sales. So in my career, and outside of reading 1-2 books, there wasn't anything quite there. And so I started researching, and all the content I found was from HubSpot, because after that first gig cold calling, I joined another startup, and I joined in sales. What I realized is they really needed somebody to talk to customers, to then figure out what to build, and then communicate what to build to developers. So I became that Renaissance salesperson, but then also launched the website and also marketed. And this was 2005 or 6, when digital marketing wasn't quite prevalent and everything was offline marketing. So I started researching, like, what are new ways to market? And I found all this content from HubSpot. So I joined their inbound marketing community, and I took every single inbound marketing course. I still remember Gary Vaynerchuk was this chubby little guy who had a 1 hour, 2 hour video course on YouTube content creation when he had the Wine TV. And see, look at folks like Gary Vaynerchuk. Like, this is 2005. He's been creating content since then. He deserves the cult-like following he has today, right? It's consistency. I mean, communication done consistently for your ideal customer profile over time will lead to big outcomes, right? Like Jason Lemkin, who's written the foreword on the book, been a great mentor of mine, has a quote in there that says, consistency is the secret ingredient that turns small actions into big outcomes. Alex Hormozi, we talked about. Consistency, he's been doing it for years. And so I started reading all this content around sales and marketing, which helped me launch a website, which helped me do SEO, which helped me create a YouTube channel for that company. And so HubSpot became my next community. Then I joined another startup, and I started getting involved in Startup Weekend, and I started mentoring at Startup Weekends, and I started becoming a facilitator, and Startup Weekend became my community. Then we eventually reconnected with my best friend from university who wanted to do a startup in the R&D tax credit space, because he was working for a big 4 company and felt it was broken, right? Globally, hundreds of billions of dollars given in tax credits and innovation funding by governments to support businesses, but it's a broken, cumbersome application process that's prone to frustrating audits, and it takes a long time to get the money. But when he asked me to join, I jumped at the opportunity. We're good friends, we're partners in every project. I said, let's do this. So when we started the company, though, when we started cold calling people, you got 2 guys who nobody has heard of saying, give me your data and I'll give you a bunch of money from the government. Why would you do that? I mean, if you got a cold call like that, would you take it? Be like skeptical.
Yeah, suspicious.
Yeah. And so we started calling big companies, small companies in all kinds of industries. And it was very hard to navigate. And so we said, you know what? We're founders who haven't been successful, and we've only been a part of failed startups and companies. There are other people like us who are craving the knowledge we're craving to build a successful company. And so we started going out there in the community, and you know, initially when you try to figure out your ideal customer profile, you test a bunch of things. You go and talk to customers in different industries, and you see where you're getting the pull. We tried manufacturing, and we tried other big tech companies, and there was no pull there. We started going to their events, and we just felt lost, right? We couldn't speak the same language. Then we started going to a lot of startup events, and we started feeling like home, like, you know, it started resonating, having great conversations. But one thing we noticed very common, and this was 2012, was all the conversations at those startup events were platitudes from CEOs, high level platitudes, right? And I'm like, this doesn't help me. Like, I want to know how I get my first customer. I want to know how I run a marketing campaign. I want to know how I get my first employee when I cannot afford. I want to know a bunch of things that I can't understand with this high level aspirational story from a CEO. A lot of the content at conferences were that. And see, when we started Boast, my co-founder was in Calgary, I was in San Francisco. So I'd moved to Calgary temporarily. And it ended up being a good market because you test small, right? Always you do things that don't scale. You can provide love and attention when it's small. At scale, it becomes harder, right? Nail it, go an inch wide and a mile deep, right? And then scale it. So as we started running around in that community, we found that two things. One, it was getting hard to sell to anyone. The larger the company, the harder, and we couldn't resonate. But the smaller the company, the access was easier, but we still needed to build social proof because there were other people who were doing it for a while, like Big Four accounting firms. So what if we're going to do it 10x better or better, faster, cheaper? They hadn't experienced it. So basically the learning there was, when you're trying to figure out an ICP, ideal customer profile, which is how you start any business, any community, start with the ideal customer profile. How do you land on the ideal customer profile? It's like, what is the size of the market? What is the ease of access? What is the propensity to pay? When we went after larger TAMs or larger total addressable markets, the ease of access was difficult, although there was a propensity to pay because we had no social proof. So we made the bet that the startup market would explode, right? Because innovators, our business was focused on funding innovation. And so we had to believe, right, that startups will fuel the future. And that was a time where no accountants or bankers wanted to work with startups. No service providers wanted to work with startups. And so they would make fun of us saying, oh, why are you selling to this community? Like, you're going to experience high churn and they can't afford to pay you. Fast forward today, all of those people are now dying to get into that market by creating startup programs, right? So we're underserved in the sense nobody wants to work with us. We need knowledge to build our business. And there's a lot of people like us who also are not served because, they're like, these are small startup guys. They can't afford to pay us, but they need knowledge. So we said, as a function of learning ourselves, we'll also open it up to them, because the one thing we did have, although we were part of failed companies, is we had access as a function of being a part of failed companies. We had access to like Silicon Valley. I was coming from there. So we said, you know what, rather than doing platitudes from CEOs, because the folks organizing events at the time were all event organizers. They weren't founders. We knew exactly what problem founders had. We hosted an event for us to learn, like an advisory session. These people would also learn, and it would be very tactical. And so we started inviting speakers who would share very tactical advice. And our email outreach then went from buy my stuff to, hey, we're hosting an event with X influencer on Y topic. We got 10 spots. Would you be interested in joining? There's going to be free pizza. 10 people came. The next one, 15 people came. Every time we hosted an event, more and more people showed up. And over time, one day, there were almost 200 people that showed up to the co-working space. And the folks running the co-working space are like, guys, this is no longer like a meetup kind of an event. This is a full-blown conference. You can't do this anymore. That evolved into the Traction community and conference and podcast and everything else. But that consistency. Now, a lot of people just stop, right? You see 10 people, you're like, But if you're just consistent enough, the word of mouth spreads and it grows, like it did during the Gulf War, like it did with us. And even if you look at Alex Hormozi, he's been producing content for years before he started to explode, right? I think you start hearing about Alex Hormozi in the last 18 months a lot more. Right, than you did. And now it's like an overnight success because the compound interest and consistency is that. So the second learning there is, once you have your ideal customer profile, is drawing their circle of influence, right? Your ideal customer profile, nailing that, is how big is this market? What is the ease of access? What is the propensity to pay? Then you're like, understand this ideal customer profile. What are their needs, goals, aspirations? What are their problems? Where do they eat, breathe, drink, sleep? What are the tools they pay for? Who are the influencers they follow? Where do they hang out? Kind of thing. So now you understand their aspirations and their problems, and you understand their circle of influence. So you can create a list of people that you want to invite as speakers. You can create a list of partners that you can co-promote with or sponsor. And then you can distribute that content on the channels they hang out. So for example, like Frederick from TechCrunch comes to all our events, conferences. TechCrunch is an influencer. It's somebody that entrepreneurs want to be in. It's a channel that they frequent, right? And so inviting TechCrunch to interview the CEO of Zoho or the CEO of Twilio on stage, and now you go to that event, you're like, oh, it's my tribe. It's somebody I follow and a channel I frequent. It's my tribe, and everyone else is entrepreneurs. So that started to happen. So figure out your ICP. Figure out firstly which ICP you should target based on the TAM, the ease of access, and the propensity to pay. Then figure out your ICP based on their problems and aspirations. It's never about your solution. So think about how Bo's journey, right? We went from saying we're going to do R&D tax credits cheaper, faster, better, to saying our purpose is enabling innovators to change the world. Every dollar spent in innovation returns 20 to the economy. And I wrote an article on Bloomberg about this. From vaccines to robots to clean drinking water is a function of innovation, yet 99% of the innovations die on the vine. And in the last 15 years, more than 50% of the Fortune 500 companies have evaporated because they don't have the know-how to innovate. Not just the funding, but the know-how. The funding is important, but what will you do if you don't have the know-how? And so Boast has gone from an R&D funding company to an R&D intelligence company. But if we just focused on the solution, we'd always be messing around with R&D tax credits, right? And so in the initial product was collect your data, streamline your R&D tax applications. Then we realized the government takes a long time to pay the money because you got to do a year of R&D, then apply for it. And R&D is euphemism for product development. It's called R&D tax credit, but it's developing new products, improving existing products. So you do a year of product development, then you apply, then you get the money. And so we said, why do companies have to wait? We raised a $100 million fund to make sure companies get the money sooner. For every month or quarter they invest in product development or R&D, we can give them the money now. But now that we have this unique data set of technical data, financial data, and their banking data, because we're lending them money, we can now tie R&D to outcomes, right? Like historically, your R&D team is a black box, no? They do something, but what is the concrete, tangible outcome they drive? Compared to like sales or marketing, you put $1 in, you know what you get out. So now we can give you the intelligence on who to hire, what projects to invest in, and so on. So that's the next set of products Boast is building. But if we just started with like our solution, we would never get there. So we started with that. Like, why do entrepreneurs or innovators want R&D funding or funding in general to grow their business? Why do they want to grow their business? To create some downstream impact. And so it started with enabling innovators to change the world. Our vision became accelerating innovation. What will the world be? What will happen as a function of your existence? What is the mission then? Meaning, how do you do it? Funding and know-how. So R&D tax credits and intelligence. And then what are your values? And the values are really important. Values are why a community will sustain, a company will sustain or erode. Culture is the leading indicator of growth, and the leading indicator of culture is value behavior match. People watch your actions, not read your lips. They don't see what's written on the wall, they see how you behave, right? So if you say, I care about transparency, but you're hiding stuff all the time, or if you say, I don't tolerate toxic behavior, yet you got like toxic salespeople or toxic employees, and you're not letting them go because they're driving some performance, then people are going to think like your values are just lip service. So that is really important, is aligning on values. Like figure out your ICP, figure out their circle of influence, align on values. Great communities, great companies are built on great alignment. If you want to build a community business, community-led business, you need to have community-centric values. As I talked to so many companies that went from obscure to iconic, there was one common framework there as well, this framework of values. They empowered people through connection, autonomy, mastery, purpose, energy, and recognition. I call it camper. If you institute camper proactively in a company, you'll have happy campers. They drive connection between people, and people crave connection. They don't crave control. They give people autonomy. They encourage people to become better and better versions of themselves. That is mastery. They embody a great sense of purpose that's beyond their product or service, like a purpose that transcends their product, transcends profits. We're in 2023, where despite the layoffs, people are able to make a living because they can consult, they can drive an Uber, they can do DoorDash if you want to make money, and they'll pay less taxes because they're contractors. So why would they come and work for you or be a part of your community just to drive you profits if there's no greater sense of purpose, right? Energy, because energy is what, you asked me this, it's midnight, do you feel a sense of energy, right? Like energy is what keeps people engaged and moving. And the last one is recognition, because we're not robots. If you thank and reward and appreciate people proactively for anything big or small, it keeps them coming back. And so that I found those common values. So if you don't have this DNA of camper or DNA of giving, where I call them community-centric values, it's hard to build a community-led business, because you can't say autonomy and then want to control, right? You can't say purpose and then make every decision based on profits. You can't say energy and then not over-communicate, right? The job of a leader is to clearly articulate and communicate the vision to excite, inspire, and motivate people. And it's not a one and done activity. You have to do this day in, day out, because people who are excited, inspired, and motivated can move mountains. And that's how you drive energy. So you can't say, I embody energy, but then be a damn squib and not want to go in front of people. You can't say that, oh, we're going to recognize and reward employees, but then do an NPS score once a year, right? You got to be proactive. So having those values are important if you want to build a community-led business. It's perfectly fine if you don't have those values. Just don't build a community-led business, because it'll erode. Your values won't align with your behaviors. And what will happen is it won't sustain. There are cheaper ways to scale a business than going the community route, because it takes a long time and it takes a lot of love and attention. Like Nick Mehta, we talked about Nick Mehta. He's like the head of community effectively, right? Gainsight had a community before they had a product. I was a part of the Gainsight Pulse community. I went to Nick's first conference. Nick has come to Traction twice. He's been on our podcast once. He's got great energy. I wear this hat because of Nick's advice. Do things that stand out, right? He said something that is, if you're afraid to be a little different, a little eccentric, and you'll blend in. And if you blend in, then you're like everyone else, and it's hard to build something iconic. Mr. Beast, right, is a perfect example of that. Being eccentric, being different, standing out. And so once you have those values, where you're appreciating people, you're driving connection, you're not focused on control, then you can start to make the journey of building a community. Because you have your ICP, you understand their pain points. In talking to them, note down 100, 200 burning aspirations, problems, right, they face, and think, if I had to write the ultimate guide to this, what would be the chapters and sub-chapters and key topics? And now you have your content. You can start building an audience. The other thing, what I realized is every obscure idea that's gone to become a cult-like phenomena has this common framework. From Christ to CrossFit has this common framework. And this is a very powerful thing. And I probably get laughed at, or people will be like, ooh, what are you saying? But from Christ to CrossFit has gone through this. People listen to you or buy your stuff, you have an audience. You bring those people together to interact with one another, you have a community. You bring that community together to create impact, and it turns into a movement. And when that movement keeps coming together around rituals, around an unwavering faith in its purpose, it turns into a cult or religion. Break down every iconic brand, every cult, every religion. It's made that journey from audience to community to movement to religion. And so then you have to lay out, like, what is the content? Like, understand where your customers are, what problems they face, what aspirations they have, what are their burning desires, where do they hang out, who do they follow. Start creating content on the platforms they hang out, and start building an audience. Once you start building that audience, start bringing them together, and it'll start developing into a community. Again, consistency and communication is the rails for all of this. You can't say, I'm going to build an audience, build a community, and not be consistent and not communicate. It's not going to happen, right? So now you start bringing them together and start forming this community. Then you push your community in the direction of creating impact towards its greater purpose that transcends the profit or your product, and it starts turning into a movement. And so if you look at it, right, what are ways to create an audience if you have nothing? You have your ICP, you have the burning question. Like you, start inviting people to host podcasts, right? You start with the podcasts, you have the recordings, turn the videos into YouTube, the audio into the audio channels like Spotify and Apple, Google. Now you take that audio or that video and turn it into shorts and push it on Insta and TikTok and maybe LinkedIn. You take the text and the summary and turn it into a detailed LinkedIn post and post every day. Look at our friend Melissa Kwan. She went from having no engagement to now thousands of people engaging on her posts, right? She added like 15,000 followers in the last 6 months or so. So start posting detail, understand the dynamics of the channel. So LinkedIn doesn't like you post external links. LinkedIn likes deep, educational, tactical content. So don't take this video and say, listen to my podcast and post it there. Post, I talked to Lloyd and I learned these 5 things about community building that were thought-provoking, and write deep. Over time, you'll write and you'll start developing this audience. Now, how do you bring this audience together? Because when people listen to you, it's still a one-way communication. It's a one-way dialogue. How do you start bringing this audience together? You can open up these recordings into live AMAs. You can create a WhatsApp or a Discord group where people can communicate with one another. You can do a weekly newsletter. I'm surprised in 2023 that enough people don't have newsletters. Email has been the biggest driver for us at Boast and at Traction. Like without cold emails, like I cold emailed you to get on your show. I could have asked Melissa for an intro, but I didn't want to. I knew she was on your show, but I just said I'll email you. And let's see, because it's a great way to communicate and articulate your thoughts when you email people concisely. Newsletter is a great way to stay in touch with people, with your community. Send a newsletter once a week, provide value, right? Then, release your podcast every other week. Once a month, bring them together. When people come together in person, I feel like there's nothing like it. Look at almost every iconic brand. It brings people together in person. We're sound and sight. If we get together in person, we're going to be taste, touch, and smell. Anytime you engage more than two senses, you start to build stronger connections. Right? Anytime you engage more than two senses, you start to build like stronger, more genuine bonds. Now that your people are coming together, how do you turn it into movement? Look at Harley Davidson, right? Almost went bankrupt in the 80s. Rebuilt the company on the ethos of community. Community wasn't a marketing strategy. Community was a business strategy. It had oversight from the president. Employees went out there and deliberately started rider clubs. Employees became riders, riders became employees. It created the Save Harley campaign. Today they created campaigns to donate to breast cancer and donate to autism and all these causes. Mr. Beast, he created content, started forming this audience, brought them together as a community. The community turned into a movement, raised $20 million to plant 20 million trees, raise $30 million to pull out 30 million pounds of plastic. That's how you create movement, is by bringing your community together to support a cause that transcends your product or your profit. And then eventually you start developing rituals. Like Red Bull, actually, the funny thing is, vodka Red Bull is a ritual. Red Bull is a cult-like brand, but how do you create rituals? It starts by developing core actions around your products or your communities. These actions that if people didn't take, your product or your community wouldn't exist. But then how do you shift those core actions into rituals? It becomes rituals once they become intrinsic motivations. Initially, it's extrinsic. I got to tell you what to do through a push notification or an email reminder. But imagine it becomes intrinsic. I got to CrossFit, perfect example. Every day I got to do a workout of the day. The workout of the day is a ritual. I come together with community members to perform this ritual. It's a workout of the day, right? So think about how you can elevate your community now to a cult or a religion. Cult is a bad word, but it shouldn't be. How do you elevate your community to a movement and then a cult by creating these rituals that become intrinsic part of the daily, right? LinkedIn, in a way, LinkedIn is not a cult, I would say, but it's an iconic brand. But there's a ritual that happens on LinkedIn every day. That's why we're going on there every day and we're posting and we're liking. It's no longer extrinsic. Yes, you get the notifications and all, but like, the people who are ardent LinkedIn followers or LinkedIn enthusiasts, they're on there on their phone scrolling every few minutes, right? So think about that. Every obscure idea that became iconic has gone from audience to community to movement to cult or religion, right? If you look at the history of these iconic brands, you'll realize that yesterday's innovation always becomes an option today and becomes a commodity tomorrow. Technology always becomes a commodity. But if you build a community, you won't become a commodity. Apple, right? The GPS wasn't accessible, then it became an option, and today there's CarPlay. You look at Apple, it never talks about its features when its competitors are bashing its features. It's always a little behind, but it sells to the aspiration. There's this great product marketing graphic which shows Mario goes and eats this mushroom and becomes Super Mario. Most of us in the business world are selling that mushroom. What resonates with people is Super Mario. Customers want an outcome. They want a purpose. They don't want products anymore. And so as we look into the future, you'll realize that brands of yesterday were built on what they told the world about themselves, and brands of the future will be built on what the community says about them. This is an important point because as you look into the future, what are some key trends that will drive marketing, right? Google is killing third-party data, so it's important to own your audience. If you're just on LinkedIn or on Twitter or Facebook, you don't own that audience if you don't have their contacts. We talked about this before on the pre-roll. Like, your algorithmic changes can control how your audience interacts with you. Nas Daily, famous YouTuber with 20 or 40 million followers across platforms, had a Facebook group with 21 million people. Facebook made some algorithmic changes and his content now shows to 5% of the audience instead of 50%. His Facebook revenue has gone to like pennies. So what did he start doing? He started bringing people together in person. He started building communities, lots of conferences, lots of meetups, WhatsApp groups. He even built a product called NAS.io, and now he's making available to the world a community management product where you can leverage WhatsApp and newsletter and meetups to bring your people together. But see, that is really important, right? So Google is killing third-party data. CPMs are going up on Facebook and TikTok because everyone wants to first help you build an audience. Then when you build that audience, they want to monetize that audience. So they start showing them ads and dropping down your content. So you see, your audience starts seeing more other people, like paid content, more ads, more other people's content than your content, right? Like those kind of algorithmic changes. Like hopefully LinkedIn's not going to do that. There was some ramblings of, LinkedIn, my audience is not seeing my content on LinkedIn, but LinkedIn made some changes where your audience will see your content more and they want to share more tactical advice because they've heard the voice of the people. The other thing is generative AI has created a sea of sameness. After the initial buzz has died out, you know which people are copy pasting from ChatGPT, right? So how do you differentiate? The third thing, and is a question you have to ask yourself personally, is when you consume content that's not business, do you follow more people or do you follow more brands? You follow more people, right? And so the rise of the micro-influencer, everyone wants to be an influencer, and this category of micro-influencers between 10 and 100,000 followers is rising. And as a company, if you don't empower your people to create audiences and build communities, you're gonna have to pay for those people someday. You're gonna have to pay other influencers. Brand engagement is going down and people engagement is going up because people buy from people do business with people connect with people. The fourth thing is short form content, which is micro content, micro learning, shorts have more engagement than anything else, the fastest medium of engagement. And the fifth is communities, because ultimately, no matter what influence you have, if you don't bring them together, once you die or something happens to you, it's done. How do you build a sustainable brand beyond the person? Is you bring people together around a purpose that's beyond the product and beyond the person. And so as I look into the future, it's inevitable. And success leads clues, right? You don't have to go far, but to just go into the past and see how some of the most iconic brands and cult-like following have come about. They were all built on communities.
And do you think the community is a concept only intended for companies that have big aspirational goals to become large, or it could be actually utilized by smaller organizations, may not have big aspiration to become an iconic brand, right? Like especially if you're not like a SaaS company.
You don't, right? B2B, B2C, influencer, it's not about the aspiration of becoming a big brand or big profit. It's the purpose. Having a purpose is more important than having the desire to be a big brand. And when many people are on the same purpose like you, it elevates that purpose even further. Like, Gainsight started the customer success movement. Then a bunch of other people starting customer success communities. And Nick Mehta's vision of customer success as a category got elevated, right? You can't, if you're the only person with a certain purpose, then you're in a category of one. But if everyone has it, then it's a true community and a movement. So I don't think it's necessary for you to want to be a big iconic brand to build a community. It's necessary for you to have a purpose that serves the people you're wanting to bring together. There are so many different communities, right? Like Traction is a fraction of the size of SaaStr. SaaStr is a massive community, several 100,000 people, 10,000 person conference. Traction that we host is a max 1,000 person conference. Yes, we have over 100,000 subscribers, but there's different forms of content they consume. Serving a similar audience, different value points, different parts of the journey. I think to build a community, you need to just have the values of giving and bring that niche together and serve a bigger purpose that transcends your product or service. To build a community, it's essential that you deliver value to an audience. To build an iconic brand, you need to go from community to movement and then, create rituals to become a cult. So you can build a community and stop there. Boast is not an iconic brand. Boast is not a cult. Boast has not created a movement. We have a community. But Harley Davidson has, Mr. Beast has, Apple has. There is a framework to go from community to cult, right? Alex Hormozi is on his way there, right? He's got a cult-like following, but it's tied to him as an audience. There is a method to get there. Then the next step is you've got this community coming together, how do you bring them together around that purpose where they feel a part of? A great example of this is, and I'm not sure if this is an urban legend or not, but President Kennedy was walking the halls at NASA at midnight, and he sees the janitor sweeping the floor, and he asks, "What are you doing?" And the janitor says, "Sir, I'm putting a man on the moon." I truly believe that everyone wants to do good in this world. There's no good or bad. They're like shades of gray. Life happens. Everyone wants to create impact, but life happens. And so if you can give people a great purpose and make them feel that the small part they do is moving the needle towards the greater purpose, then they feel they're doing it too, right? Imagine where your purpose cascades to the janitor, and the janitor feels, I'm putting a man on the moon. That's why the work I'm doing is important. That is great purpose. That's when you become a movement.
Yeah, I've heard a similar story. I forgot the name of the NASCAR team. They kind of give that same purpose for even the guys that actually are in the pit crew and everyone that's part of that, right? Like even not just the driver, but everybody that's part of the actual NASCAR team is part of the winning team, right? So everybody's putting all their energy to make sure that they win. So even just looking for little spots on the card to make sure that nothing gets in the way of the whole team winning. That's the whole purpose behind it. So obviously you talked a lot about building a community, but a lot of times people go into it with the intention of monetizing right away. So where does money, comes into this community building aspect of it, right? Like even like you said, you don't have to have aspiration to build a big brand, but you have a purpose, and the purpose obviously to help a cause or whatever that might be. But there's always, without money, you can't fund any of these things, right? Like where does that monetization comes in, and how do you treat the desire to make money, not necessarily like misleading the people that you are creating the community around?
I have a whole chapter on monetization. Communities that don't monetize eventually die because people burn out, right? The thing is, if you start with monetization on day one in mind, like I want to make money, your decision making will choke the community and it'll wither, so you won't have it anyway. If you chase money, you make short-term decisions. If you chase control, you destroy relationships. The only way to build something lasting is to focus on impact. So I'll tell you like Bo's story, right? So we started doing these meetups, and these meetups turned into conference. And when we got to 10 million in revenue, we really didn't have a marketing team, okay? But as a function of doing these events, we'd meet more and more people. And the people would come were our ICP and the circle of influence, vendors, partners, right? And so we would get a great deal of referrals and clients from it. Either, it's hard to attribute direct clients from the community because they might come to an event, then it gets forwarded, then they go and check out a webinar, then they forward that, somebody else downloads a demo, and then they buy it and it gets attributed to inbound leads. But having willed this into existence, that all the partnership relations, all the media relations all came from that community, right? So even when I talked to Atlassian's chief revenue officer, they hosted 5,000 events from the community last year, and I can't figure out attribution, but you got to believe that the momentum takes you forward and there's some activity there. So if it's driving your product or business, it's great goodwill, right? Like for us at Boast, we got customers from it. It's a direct path. There was this, when we did the deal with the growth equity firm, they asked like, how did you hit this inflection point to 10 million? And we see this going, it hits at a certain point. And then there was another chart that showed the number of events we started to do at the same time when we started to ramp up two webinars a week, right? So that is important. If it's your company, the goodwill is going to drive you leads, partnerships, relationships. It's important you mine it though. You can't just do charity and drive people there and not ask the question. Like for us, it was like just asking him straight up, hey, we offer this service. You think you or anyone can use it? Our sales guys became brokers of resources and community managers more, because they were saying, hey, I can connect you with that. I can connect you with this service. You need a banker because you're not able to get debt, or you need an investor, or you need a product manager. We'll help you. That's what community is, right? You connect each other. And then we're like, hey, do you have any use for our thing? Like, how are you doing your R&D credits? It's a very casual conversation. A lot of people, what they do is that they confuse community with charity. Community is not charity. Like, I understand, yes, you can be a nonprofit, but it's not like the martyr and everyone walks on you like a bridge. There's no shame in asking, do you have use for our service? service. Very simple. And let's say you're a community only product, meaning you're not a community led company, then there's many ways to monetize, right? Like you provide all this free content, but then you can provide premium content. Folks like Lenny are making like millions of dollars on Substack. Have baseline content that you provide value, and then have some gated content where people will pay extra. You can use NAS.io to even monetize a newsletter and a WhatsApp group. You can host events. When you host events, people will pay for sponsorships, people will pay for tickets. Our marketing made money because we would make money from the conferences, right? And that the profits, the bulk of the profits went to support Launch Academy, which is a nonprofit incubator. And the founder of Launch Academy was our co-founder in Traction. His name is Ray Walia. And so you can charge for memberships, you can charge for ticket sales, you can monetize a newsletter. There's so many ways to monetize that you don't have to go the charity route. But if you don't monetize, even if it's either not driving to your product or driving to your pocket in some other way, you will not monetize long term. You'll burn out, right? Eventually, you need the resources to sustain. Without it, you won't.
But I think like even the example that you gave at the very beginning, you were talking about how in the early days of your sales journey, you were trying to learn about sales, and then you came across HubSpot blogs, then you gravitated toward their brand. And I'm assuming you probably purchased HubSpot somewhere along the way in one of those companies that you've built, right? Because I think they were not expecting to monetize their content. They were expecting to convert you into a community, right? Like they wanted you a part of the tribe of who believes in inbound, and then gradually becoming their customer, and then ultimately a brand ambassador. Anybody who's been in the HubSpot ecosystem, they are almost always referring that product to anyone that they come across, because they know the product, not only the product is good, but the actual customer service is good. There's a lot of people that you can find who actually are familiar with the technology as well. So we talked a lot about community. We talked a lot about how you've built multiple companies. I'm just curious to learn, a little bit more about some of your decision-making framework, because you've had a lot of failures and some tremendous success. But a lot of that has to do with how you make decisions. Like even when you talked about when your parents were kind of thinking, why would you, with an engineering degree, going to do sales? But that was a decision that you made, and then every one of those decisions that you've made got you to where you are today. So what's kind of your decision making framework in terms of how you go about making very strategic decisions?
I don't know, man. I think from the heart a lot, and I don't know if there's a decision-making framework really. The way I think about it is I enjoy risk and ambiguity. I'm like a 0 to 1 person. I had Jason Fried from Basecamp on my podcast a few weeks ago. And he said something very profound. He's like, founder and CEO title are in loggerheads with each other as you scale, especially. It's like having the title of CTO and Chief Luddite in the same title. The job of a CEO as you scale is to stabilize the business, and the job of the founder is to inject new risk in the business. Because by injecting new risk in the business, you grow, right? New markets, new channels, new products, etc. And that was what I did throughout. And my co-founder Alex was the CEO. I was the co-founder president. My job was trying to inject risk. His job was trying to stabilize. And so that desire to inject risk actually comes from my DNA of being part of risk growing up. And the Gulf War, the building the community comes part of my DNA, the slums, the Gulf Wars. It's just my journey, right? Upbringing. The way I think about it, about things is this going to bring me joy? Is it challenging enough, right? And that's really how I make most of my decisions. But I think like if you give me an example of a specific decision I made, it would be easier to break that down. The sales thing was easy, right? I graduated engineering. I've always wanted to go into entrepreneurship, and I hated the programming courses. And because I enjoyed like the vibe of risk, entrepreneurs, I asked somebody, what's the best skill? He said, I have everything I have because of my ability to sell. Learn to sell and you'll never, ever starve.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one decision might be like the fact that you gave majority ownership of Boast, right? So that was a very strategic decision to free up yourself, and now you can go focus on other things. How do you come to a decision like that?
I think I said this early on that great companies, great communities are built on great alignment. If you have alignment, especially around the co-founders, then you know how to get to the outcome. So a lot of founders, they don't write down specific things. They want to build a business. Have you ever asked yourself, what is my personal definition of success? How much money do I want in my bank account? How long do I want to run the company? Is there a version of the company I don't want to work for? How many people write this down? Have you written it down?
I have aspirations of what the future needs to be and how long I want to be involved. But some of the other things I can't get specific because I just don't know what reality could be.
Yeah, but like if you don't write that down, like, so for example, we live in a society where enough is never enough. A goal is never a goal, it's a moving target. And then what happens? Like, life happens, right? We spend all our time commuting back and forth to work, picking, dropping kids. You have 4 kids, I have 3 kids, making dinners between our jobs. Sundays are spent planning for the next week. You pay your mortgage, you pay your car payments, you pay federal state tax. You have just enough energy to have one outing with your family once a week, one vacation a year, and then you retire at 65 and die in your 70s sometime. So you basically have 10 years to live, and probably those 10 years are not functional. So it's very important to figure out what is your definition of success and build a company around that versus trying to build somebody else's definition of success. We're both immigrants, right? So I came to this realization that all my life I chased success looking for happiness. And when success came, I ended up depressed. And then I realized money is no good if you don't use it to buy freedom. Success is freedom. Freedom to do what you want, where you want, with whom you want, when you want. No holds barred, right? On your prime, in your prime, in your time. There's no good if success comes not in your prime. And then somebody else, and then somebody else is playing with your dime, right? Like he's gone to kids and everything else. So what had happened was my co-founder Alex at Bose, he's a very level-headed, well-reasoned person. I'm the emotional, bouncing off the walls, right? And he always said, we'll take money the day we can turn 1 into 3. And why do you want to give up control of your company and bring on other partners? It's a long marriage, right? I have only ever worked at startups. My first job was at a small company, and then I only worked at startups. And that small company wasn't a startup, but it was a small business making cold call. And there was one thing in common amongst all those startups. They were all venture backed and they all failed. So I didn't make a penny. And I didn't make any good salary anyway, right? Because you joined for the equity. And then me and Alex worked outside of Boast. We did a couple other startups, right? And they failed too. Together we did Automatically, which was a chatbot built on top of Zendesk that failed. Prior to Boast, Alex did a startup in the recruiting space that failed. I did a startup, which was an AI sales assistant that was incubated by Bessemer. They came up with the idea, put together the team. So did that failed, blew through 6 million. So all my experience had only been working at venture-backed startups that failed. So what is the lesson there? Like success and failures leaves clues. The lessons there is the chance of raising venture money and failing are a lot higher than succeeding to some outcome. And my wife, she's a physician, she's an ER physician, and she's been supporting the family for the last little while through like only working at startups to doing her own failed outings. And she said to me when we started getting investor interest that if you take somebody else's money and try to build a zero-sum game and it goes to zero, I can't keep supporting the family. You're going to have to go get a job somewhere. And so now this is the power of community, power of community, luck, all of these things combined. Luck is the 10% that tips the 90% in your favor. And in many ways, risk and luck are different sides of the same coin, right? And so during the pandemic, there was an opening where people were coming together and we hosted an event. Through a community partner, they recommended a VC to get on a panel. So we let them be on the panel. It's a growth equity fund called Radiant Capital. Great people. I love them. They hit me up and said, hey, why don't you join our venture partner network? It seems like you know a lot of good people and we'll give you carry. And I said, listen, I don't have the energy to be in the venture partner network. I have a business to run and this is something I just do on the side. And I said, what's your business? And I explained what Boast does and their jaws dropped. What? You're selling $100 bills for $20 and with no marketing, you got to this much in revenue? And I said, yeah. And they're like, okay, we'd be interested in taking an investment. And I'm like, no, like my co-founder is anti-investment. Don't want to explore raising money. And until then, I only knew what VC was and knew what private equity was. VC was nothing wrong with VC, right? Think about it. They raise a lot of money and they make a promise to return that money. If you or I have to invest money and we don't get a return, how would you feel? You'd be miserable.
Not so happy.
Not so happy. So that's what they take money from institutions and high net worth individuals who want to do something with that money, right? Especially like endowment funds and things like that. It funds research and a lot of downstream benefits. So they are returning. They create this asset class that is high risk based on the promise that they'll return outsized to their investors. So the society chastises VCs, but they're not wrong. They promise to return. Ask society, if you put money somewhere and you don't get a return, how would you feel? So you would just put it in the S&P 500 then, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't invest in any startup. Every startup founder out there had to invest their own money. They wouldn't be as generous to put it in startups. They would put it in the S&P 500 or other ETFs and index funds, right? So that's the reality. It's very easy to be on the other side and complain, but you don't know the other person's pain. But regardless, if you know what VCs want and you know what you want, which is what is my personal definition of success, what brings me joy, how long do I want to run the company, how much money I want in the bank account, then you'll know what the best optimum path is. Is it roll the dice, go and raise venture capital and go on this triple, triple, double, double, or triple, triple, double, double, double journey and see if you can go? Not every business can be on that path, right? Or you'll look for alternate routes. So what is the alternate route? Bootstrapping. If you bootstrap, what are the options? Take it to 10 million. See, in SaaS, the thing is, once you're at 10 million, even if you're growing small clips to 30, 40% over a 10-year period, is still 100 million in revenue. The one thing that Warren Buffett did was compound interest. SaaS has compounding effects, right? And so for us, when these guys explained what they were, growth equity, which is not quite VC, which is take a lot of money and swing for the fences, and you either go bust or go boom. They don't care about in between. And it's not private equity where they buy you and create these earnouts and all these things and you go through this long diligence period. They said growth equity, meaning we're more hands off than a PE, but we liquidate the founders while letting you have skin in the game. So you de-risk while having good upside, provided you're bootstrapped, provided you have a clean cap table, and provided you have capital efficient growth. They want to make like 5 to 7x in 5 to 7 years. They're not looking for 20x, 30x. So it became a no-brainer. When they said, we'll let you take this money off the table, it was life-changing money for me, man. I'd never seen, my family on both sides hadn't seen that money. It would be stupid for me now. When that opportunity came and I said no, and this was during the pandemic, and to raise at a unicorn porn valuation, it would be
stupid not to do it. Yeah.
Not only stupid, it would be disrespectful to our families who endured through multiple failures before and fed. And it became a no-brainer because we sold about 53 or so percent of the company, and me and my co-founder still retain almost close to 40%, 38%, something like that of the company, a good chunk of the company, and we have 2 board seats. So it became a no-brainer. And then we transitioned out and we have the latitude to pick and choose what we want to do. See, when you're poor and when you're surviving, you can't do what you really want to do, right? You got to compromise on a lot of things. But when you have the freedom, you've earned the right to live according to your values and what brings you joy. So if you can institute that, why wait? Why roll the dice? Because think about it, an entrepreneur's family is always collateral damage to their dreams. And I'd seen my wife like suffer through, like, she's a rock star, man. Like, we have 3 kids she manages, and she's an ER physician. I do nothing at home. I had only one job, which is to figure out a business that worked and made some money. And I went through so many hits and misses working, founder stress, burnout, working 80 hours a week. My wife's an ER physician. She still takes care of the family. She still makes sure the kids go to school. Now, after all of this, I say, you know what? I'm not going to take this money and I'm going to go and build a unicorn, and then it blows up, right? And so, you know, it's important when you make decisions, especially when you're a community-led DNA, you think about other people before making a decision. Not that it just impacts you, but it impacts like 5, 6 other people around you. And if that means that I take less today to make few people happy, I'll do that. Because ultimately, you know, after a certain point, money stops having its motivation, right? And its value. I'm not like, I'm not a young guy in my 20s with booze, babes, and blow in my day-to-day sort of life, right? My lifestyle will not significantly change by adding another X million. So what will it be? Spend more time with the family, put the kids in good schools, have good help at home so you don't run around, and have free time so you can work out and spend time with the family, right? So why raise the money to optimize, to dilute yourself more and more stress to potentially eventually walk away with similar or a little more money? So basically, you know, I had Ali, who wrote the book Super Founder, on my podcast a while ago. And he did say one thing, that the commonality between all the founders who built multi-billion-dollar companies is they had one small success before their unicorn, right? And so if you keep like, you know, running, I've been running for so long and failing for so long, de-risking is a good way to now say I can swing for the fences also. You've showed your family the respect. You've earned the respect also that, hey, this person is not just running science projects that keep blowing up. And now you've earned the right to swing for the fences on, or do nothing in your time, in your prime, right?
So true. I've heard the same story. Like the second time founders are usually even more successful. Like I think we talked earlier about G2, Godard Abel. I think that's the G2 is this his third gig. I think he had the first one. I forgot if the first or the second one was Big Machine, which was literally, I think he drove it to the ground because the revenue wasn't there to sustain the team. And he had to get back into the role of selling. He was on my podcast a while ago. And then he actually ended up turning the company around, sold it back to, I think sold it to Oracle, and then went on to build SteelBricks, which is a CPD. I think it was a quote to cash, QPD or whatever that category is. And then he sold that to Salesforce, and then he went on to build G2. So it's like the third time around. But I think it does take a couple of multiple tries, failures, learning the lessons, and then building from scratch.
Exactly.
So obviously,
and ultimately, my hope is more people will do this. We lie to ourselves a lot that we're looking to create impact. Unless something really burns you, you're in it to make money, right? So don't lie to yourself. Alignment is very important. It's very important to figure out why you're doing something. What is the end goal? Because if you don't take care of yourself and your family, you're no good to anyone, right? I hadn't spent any time with my kids, man. And my daughter comes to me one day and she's like, Dad, like after this raise, like you had COVID and we thought we were going to lose you. And then you said you'd spend more time with us and you just gotten worse. And I said, sweetie, we've added like so many people. Like, I don't even know what's going on. We have to do right by them and make sure that they believed in the company and we show them a good future. And she says, why don't you just work for somebody who thinks like you so I can have my dad back? Eventually, you got to think, like, why are you doing something? Is it to satisfy your ego or is it to drive a better outcome for you and your family? And then you got to make the decision that way. And I think, when you talked about rubric for decision making and we went into a couple of decisions, but your rubric for decision making always has to come from your values, your non-negotiables. A lot of what we do in life is centered around negotiables. Think about it, especially we come from immigrant families, right? Growing up, as everything is a negotiable. Like, you know what? Go to work an hour early, leave an hour late, don't live in the city, save money, go live in the suburbs somewhere far. And then you go to the suburbs and then, you have to commute an hour back and forth. You can't walk to anything. You got to drive everywhere. All our life, especially as immigrants, is centered around negotiables. How about you start building your life centered around non-negotiables? These are my non-negotiables. The reason why I moved to Dubai is I had a few non-negotiables. It has to be safe. It has to be a community-driven vibe. I need to have easy access to help and inexpensive. I need to live on a beach. It still needed to be a metropolitan city. The beach is a non-negotiable. Now, of course, I cannot, like, if I'm piss poor, I can't say my non-negotiable is live on the beach. Then I'm going to be a bum on the beach, right? That's not the goal. The goal is you earn the right to have non-negotiables. And then the second time around, you're more deliberate. When you're poor and you're surviving, you can't have non-negotiables, but you got to keep them in mind. There are non-negotiables that even when you're poor, you cannot compromise on, right? Like, there's no point in my view now, after living in the suburbs and now living in a city where everything is walkable and accessible, there's no excuse for wanting to live in a bigger house in the suburbs when you can live, to me, walkable. Because, systems eat motivation for breakfast, right? Everyone has the right intention of wanting to go to the gym and work out, but they never do. But what if you put yourself in an environment where you have nothing to do but to walk? You're working as a part of your living day to day.
Or even living in a building that has a gym, so you have no excuse to have to pick up the car and drive somewhere to go.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is a lot of what we do is centered around negotiables. Everything is a negotiation. Have some non-negotiables in life and build your life around that, and everything will start to get better.
Yeah. It's
By the way,
a fireside chat that I feel like I can talk to you for hours. I do kind of want to ask one last question. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently?
I would do nothing differently because, I'll give you one interesting story. So my wife and I have known each other since our teens. I was her prom date. We both come from Indian families, immigrants, and she's a very smart kid, got her med school, second year of undergrad without MCATs. And she always wanted to be a doctor. And it was clear, I was a bumbling idiot, finagled myself into engineering, didn't finish high school. A long story, worked at only startups. 2 days before our wedding in 2008, our wedding was called off. Our parents didn't think, like her side of the family didn't think I was good enough. And my mother was shattered because she was like a kid in the family. And my mom only asked me one thing. Are they right that I didn't raise you right? That you'll amount to nothing? that drove me for the last 14, 15 years, right? That one thing drove me so hard. And as I talked with so many entrepreneurs through our traction community, I realized that one of the key drivers for entrepreneurship is some burning spite or anger to change the status quo, to prove the naysayers wrong, to drive a certain change. Happy people, it's very difficult for happy people to drive change, right? And so that drove me on the journey one after the other, despite failures, working for failed startups, to keep pushing, to keep pushing, to keep pushing. And even after I left the day-to-day at Boast and I came upon all this free time, I had one more thing that I needed to check off, is like I was not educated enough, right? Although I had an engineering degree, but I didn't finish high school. So I finagled myself into engineering. What had happened was I applied to college and nobody would take me in. And this place was starting a new program. And they said, write these exams and then, we'll look at the transcripts. And they asked me where the transcripts were. And I said, there's political unrest in Kuwait, so I don't have them yet. They said, start the semester. And they forgot to follow up. So I finished engineering that way. So I was never into studying. And her side of the family was always, you need to have a master's degree. Her brothers are doctors. You need to have, a master's, an MBA. And I was never into studying. I mean, I think I said in the pre-call that I felt I had a learning disability. I just hated reading. It's very hard for me to read and write. It takes a lot. So that was another box I wanted to check, is I said I'll write a book. And, my goal is to make this book a bestseller. And I want to gift print one of the bestseller to my mom and say thank you, that you didn't raise me wrong, that everyone who said that he would amount to nothing. That's why I didn't stop at the company. I mean, that was good. But I think writing a book just overcomes that challenge of I can't read. I hate reading. I hate writing, as I had to read and write a lot. And then because your old parents don't care about the money you made. It makes no difference for them. They care about 5 people say something good about you. It means a lot more to them than, you made some money, you sold a company. What does it matter to them? They're living a certain way and it doesn't change their life. What matters to them is everyone comes and says, I read your son's book and it's profound and I learned a thing or two. You're lucky, you raised him well. That is my goal, ultimately.
Yeah, well, it's a great note to end our conversation. I really enjoyed our conversation, Lloyd. Whether you've finished high school or not, you have a breadth of knowledge and experience that I don't think could be bought or taught in school, for sure. That life has taught you a lot, and
awesome.
I appreciate you sharing that wisdom.
Awesome, man. We went for a couple hours, but I truly loved the conversation. This is a long one. And the book will be on fromgrassrootstogreatness.com or lloydlobo.com. My name has an E in it, so Lloyed. And it's actually pronounced Lloyd. I asked my mom, why did you do this? Growing up, I'd get made fun of a lot. And she would always tell me as a kid, someday you'll start a company and you can't trademark Lloyd, because it's a very common name. So I threw an E in there. So it's going to be on lloydlobo.com. I'm on Lloyd Lobo on LinkedIn, so feel free to follow me there. I write content around bootstrapping and community and just mental health and life in general, living intentionally. And yeah, it would mean a lot if you get the book from grassrootstogreatness.com, lloydlobo.com. Thank you so much, man. Love and peace, brother.
Awesome. Yes, thank you.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.